Steven, hello from Athens, and thank you very much for being with her tonight. Now, what lessons has Europe learned from the Greenland crisis so far?
Well, one thing we've learned is Donald Trump is increasingly impulsive, that he's become more insulting of Europeans and their interests, and he seems to be, particularly after Venezuela and Iran, more convinced that he can do whatever he wants. Now, obviously, there are restraints on his power, both within the United States and among allies. And one of the lessons from Greenland, I think, is you need to prepare for Trump. You need to have powerful counter-Trump instruments in your pocket. As I like to say, it's okay to flatter him some, that's fine, but you need a gun in your pocket. And the European Union did have a gun. It had two guns, actually. One was $93 billion in counter tariffs that it had chosen not to use earlier with Trump when they did this 15% tariff deal, which some people criticized as weak. And the second is, of course, the big anti-coercion instrument, which was first designed to be used against China, but has not been used and probably should not be used. But the EU's emergency summit meeting, when it threatened to impose the 93 billion euros in counter tariffs, was very powerful because it spooked the markets. The markets fell. Trump pays attention to the markets, and with the help of Mark Rutte and others, they came up with a way for Trump to say, well, we have a framework agreement, so I'm not going to impose tariffs, which meant the EU didn't have to impose tariffs, which meant the markets calmed down, and Trump seemed to back down, at least for now. So that's the big lesson, which is you can't always listen to every word he says and take it seriously because he's a negotiator. He keeps saying, I want a deal. And if you want a deal, it means you want to negotiate. I never really believed he would use military force in Greenland, but it was certainly a very effective way to increase pressure on Denmark and the Europeans and to get perhaps some decent results.
You talk a lot about the markets. Now, the financial markets have coined up the term taco trading. It's an acronym for Trump always chickens out. The idea that Trump issues maximalistic threats and ultimately backs down. From a foreign policy perspective, does that perception weakens U.S. deterrence abroad?
It weakens Trump's negotiating tactics a bit if people presume that's what's going to happen. The problem is he's so impulsive, one day he won't chicken out, and then everyone will run around going, oh my God. So one has to be a bit careful, I think. I do think, you know, he's a businessman, he's a negotiator, he's not a foreign policy thinker. There are things, there are issues that bother him, and Greenland and security has been bothering him since 2017 in his first term. And NATO itself would admit, and Denmark would admit, it hasn't done enough around Greenland in security terms. So now more will be done, ideally done in the context of NATO, which is the way it should be done. And the point is, you really do, even if you don't like Trump, you need to keep the United States committed to NATO, because NATO, without the United States, as a friend once said to me, is like a body with a skeleton removed. And so this is really the issue.
Now, Europe as a whole, does it have a united front, or is it more or less a fractured union?
Well, it's never really a united front, let's be honest. 27 countries have different interests. Look at Ukraine. Spain looks pretty far away from Ukraine. Spain's a lot less interested in spending money on defense because of Ukraine than Germany, Poland, France, even Britain. And on Greenland, I think you could see there were countries, particularly in Central Europe, who were much quieter on the issue because they really didn't want to push the Americans too far, push them out of NATO. So the Poles, though supportive of Denmark and supportive of territorial integrity and sovereignty, were much less vocal than, let's say, the French, even Bardella. And you saw that among the Baltic states and Poland, and even the Nordics, though they were obviously defending Denmark, were very eager not to push the Americans too far. So was this fractured? Sure, but at the same time, there was an agreement on suspending the old EU-US trade deal that people thought was weak, and even using these counter tariffs. So when it came to the really important issue, Europe was willing to go ahead.
In Europe, is there a leader willing to somehow stand up to Trump and assert its direction?
Well, I don't think it really works like that, to be honest. Europe doesn't have a leader. Europe's never really had a leader. I mean, Europe is designed not to have a leader. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen is the head of a bureaucracy. She's not a political leader. She's not elected, you know, really, except by the parliament. And that was a ratification. So what is important is the European Council, I mean, which is all the leaders when they get together in the council and make these big decisions. And then there's some people more influential in the council, to be sure. Friedrich Merz of Germany has become a much more important voice than Olaf Scholz ever was. Macron's voice is weaker. I mean, he's loud, but his position's much weaker. You have, in the end, oddly, from the outside, the voice of Britain, Keir Starmer, who has a good relationship, pretty good, with Trump. His views are certainly listened to, even if they're not acknowledged. So has Europe ever had a leader? I don't think so. Everyone complains that the leadership's weak in the European Union and in Europe, but frankly, it's designed not to have very strong leaders, and certainly no one person who would be able to speak for all of Europe. I think that's a false idea.
And to sum up the Greenland issue, do you sense that is Trump likely to accept a deal that does not include ownership?
Looks like that now, but you never know with him because he keeps coming back to things. I mean, I think he was willing to step back this time because the Pentagon and the markets and even people in the White House, Marco Rubio, were saying, you know, we don't want to go to war with NATO. President Trump, you saved NATO, remember? So let's not destroy it. You got it to spend all this more money on defense. So why ruin it now? But we'll see what the deal is, if there is a deal, and he may come back later. I don't think the Danes feel very comfortable that it's over.
Steven, we follow international affairs and Trump's foreign policy, but in the U.S. interior, there is a lot of social unrest regarding the situation in Minneapolis, etc. Do you sense that these kind of events can somehow affect his presidency and the way that people view him in the U.S.?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, his approval ratings are in the low 40s, sometimes high 30s. They've never gone much higher than that. Even the people who support him, I think, are showing much more concern about the use of these federal agents inside America, particularly when they're shooting unarmed people in the back and then pretending that they were under threat all the time. I think this feels to many Americans the wrong way to go. And Trump is already saying, well, I'll look at ICE, so maybe he will pull back. But what's happened has been kind of shocking, and also the way he's used these federal agents who are supposed to deal with immigration cases, only to hit Democratic-run cities. I think people understand that this is a deeply political affair. And if anything, it adds to polarization and it adds to anger. And I think in November, we get the midterms, and I think the Democrats will probably win at least the House. So things will change in Washington. And then inevitably, this is Trump's last term, despite his desire to go on forever. So lame duck-itis, as we call it, will slowly come to the fore, because Republicans will look beyond Trump and make some decisions about who to support in the next presidential election. So, what's happening in America now is very, very important. If you combine that with inflation, which Trump has not been very good at trying to control, the price of ordinary items, the whole question of affordability has become a major issue. And the Democrats will push on this very hard, like, is the ordinary American working person able to buy what they could buy before, et cetera, which works. It's always the economy first.